Okay, so in this video we'll focus on creating some of these controls that we haven't worked with before. Just to recap, we know what this program does. We enter the temperature in degrees Celsius, so for example 100 degrees Celsius would be the boiling point of water. I will click the calculate button and we have the answer here in degrees Fahrenheit. Why don't we focus on these controls here, creating these three particularly. We have a label control which is visible right at the beginning of the program because we're prompting the user and telling the user what to do. Then we have a text box control in which the user types the temperature in degrees Celsius. And then lastly we have this control. Now this control starts out being invisible because we really don't have an answer for the user when the program first starts to run. But after the user clicks that calculate button, this label control appears. So we'll create these three controls, the two labels in the text box, and we will also create one of the buttons. If we create one button, the other two are easy. I'm not talking about the code behind the buttons, but simply creating the controls and placing them on the form. We'll focus on the functionality in later videos. Okay, so we start out with our code for the graphics window as well as the picture. We won't discuss that in this video. You know how to do that by now. Now let's start with that first label, the one that says to the user, enter the degrees Celsius. You know, we're introducing a new control into our program, so we have to come up with a name. And you'll see in a lot of my programs and even in a lot of textbooks, when you're naming a control, you typically, this is not required, but it's certainly recommended, you would add a prefix to the name so that you can look at that name and know, oh, that's a label, or oh, that's a text box. So when I'm creating a label control in my programs, I'm going to make sure the name starts with LBL. So I look at that, whatever the name is that follows, I can look at that and I see the LBL and I think, oh, that must be a label control. So why don't we call this one LBL enter cells, because this is the label control that prompts the user to enter the degrees Celsius. Okay, so it is the Fremi extension package that allows us to use these types of controls. So we're going to start by typing FC controls. FC is for the Fremi company, you might remember from previous videos, and that's the extension package that we're using. And now we're going to do an add label using my IntelliSense, of course. And then what you have to do is specify the width of the label. So 175 pixels wide would be about, you know, it would be the size that you saw in the demo. And you can change that as needed. And then the height of the label will make 25. You know, because the label really is kind of a long rectangle, so 175 wide by 25 high is a typical, I guess, what you would see. But of course, you know, you can change that if you need to. And then we specify the text that's going to go into the label. I'll just draw your attention over here. The add label method requires 3 arguments. Remember this terminology? First we supply the width, then the height. I've already typed that stuff in. And now the text that you want the label to say. In this case, we'll say enter degrees Celsius. Okay, and then see if I run this, it goes way up there. Any control that you add is going to go right to the upper left hand corner. So you want to follow it up with a move method. So we'll say FC controls dot move. And then I've already plotted out these coordinates in advance. So what control are we moving? LBL enter cells in this case. And we'll move it to about the 50-50 mark. 50x, 50y. And there it is. So then we'll follow up with the text box right underneath it. Okay, again, I'm adding a new control to the program. I want to come up with a good descriptive name. I'd like to use a conventional prefix so I can look at the control and tell right away it's a text box. So I'll use TXT, and you'll see this in a lot of my programs. TXT cells, because this is where the user is going to enter the degrees Celsius. Okay, so once again, using our FC controls extension, let's see, this is add text box. using my IntelliSense. Okay, what is this method expecting by way of arguments? Again, a width and a height, and text, if any. But you know what? This text box is starting out blank, so I'm going to leave that blank. So we'll do the same size as the label. In fact, the 175 by 25, and then there's no text involved here. It starts out blank, so we're going to just do an empty string, meaning just open quotes and close them right away with nothing in between. That's called a null string, meaning a nothing string. Okay, and then we want to move this because we certainly don't want it to go right to the upper left-hand corner. Okay, moving, who are we moving? TXT cells in this case, and we'll put this 50 as far as the X, and that'll line it up with the label right above it. And then, you know, we don't want to do 50 for the Y because that'll put it right on top of the label and obscure the label. So let's do 75 because we know the label is 25 high, so 75 will put us right underneath it. And again, you know, you'll be able to eyeball your interface and make changes as necessary. I'm not going to be super picky about where everything is, as long as it's in the roundabout location and looks presentable. Only if it looks really bad would I, you know, start docking points. So one more label we said we would create. Now this is the one that starts out invisible, but ultimately will display the output in degrees Fahrenheit once that's computed. So why don't we call this LBL Fair, as in Fahrenheit? Again, using FC controls, adding a label once again, and we'll make it once. You know what? This one, I think 175 won't cut it because you know, it's a longer sentence. It says something like, for example, 100 degrees Celsius is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That's kind of a mouthful. So let's make it wider, a little bit wider. So we'll make it 300. That'll do. And then 25 high, of course. And then again, this one starts out not saying anything. So we're going to start that out with a null string, and then we'll change it later once we have an answer for the user, once we've computed the degrees Fahrenheit. So let's move this. And this one was a little bit lower than the other two controls. So we're moving LBL Fair. And we'll keep it at X equals 50. But we'll put it down more, and we'll say Y is 200. Okay, let's create one of the buttons, and then the other two are basically the same way. Let's create the calculate button, so we'll call it BTN. That's typically the prefix you'll use when you're adding a button. We'll call BTN calc. And once again, calling upon FC controls, and this is add button. You see that in your IntelliSense. And for the button, once again, I'm looking at the arguments required here for the add button method. It's expecting a width of the button, a height of the button, and then the text. So it's a lot like adding a label or a text box even. So why don't we make the button about 100 wide by 50 tall, and we will make the text calculate. Okay, and we'll go ahead and run this and check out our interface. Uh-oh, I forgot to move the button. See what happens? FC controls, move. Who are we moving? BTN calc. Where are we moving it to? Let's see, I already plotted this out, so I've got in my program 150 X, 300, okay. All right, so we have our controls. Again, we do have a label control here, but we can't see it yet. And we have our button. So in the next video, I'll start out with all the buttons in place, and we'll focus on the functionality. Again, the other two buttons, the clear and the close, or the exit, whatever it is, you know, you would create those exactly the same way as we just did this one. You would really just change the X coordinates and the text on the button. So